Hey, what's up guys, Metal571 here, and today I want to talk about the Sennheiser HD800. Now I've reviewed this headphone before, quite a while ago, in a partially ANAX modded form, but now I want to talk about it again because since that video long ago, I have come across a pair of these and now own them myself. So I want to talk about my experience, what it's like to own this thing. I'm sure some people out there are salivating over it, and I'll tell you if you really should be, and what this thing is all about. Now we may not do a standard format here because this is kind of like a part 2 of the review, sort of an update. So I'm going to go over a couple things that I felt are important to know when looking at buying this headphone. First of all, the headband. This is a funny topic because it's not something that I really expected or saw coming, but I think I might have talked about this in the original review. But up here, this headband adjustment, actually I wear it at max all the time, and it's a little weird that I do that. And I feel like for some people with maybe really large heads, you may actually want to try this thing on. I know, it's probably impossible to do that unless you can find one at a local store to try. But the comfort is superb. I still think it's one of the most comfortable headphones ever. It's just that the ear cup is massive. And if you're wondering why mine look this way on the inside, it's because I have removed the driver covers, basically, because I think it makes it sound slightly better, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. I am going to talk about SDR later on in the video, so that's coming. But anyway, yeah, it's just an interesting thing that I had to adjust the headband at like its max setting in order for this to really be fitting correctly. The sound also varies enormously depending on where you put this thing on your head and you move it around. So something to keep in mind. Anyway, going off of that, because I have to adjust it so wide, and because the clamping force is really not that strong in this headphone, it tends to fall off your head real easily. And it's another thing that I don't see mentioned much, but when you actually own one of these and you wear it, like if you shake your head, like I'm wearing a 380 Pro right now, and this thing it's a clamp. It's not as vicey as the 280, but it clamps a lot, and there's no way this thing's gonna fall off my head because it's designed for monitoring. This, however, if I do so much as look down, they start sliding right off. Like they weigh quite a bit. I mean, not as much as some planers, but they weigh enough, and the clamp force is light enough that they start falling right off your head. If you're not used to that, like if you came from the HD600 like I did, which I still own, but if you came from that part of audiophilia, then buying this and upgrading to this is definitely going to be a bit of a different experience for you. Also, the cable that I basically called something that could survive a nuclear apocalypse, I believe, is still really well. It's working fine, but wow, it is so annoying. This cable is like it's built strong, but it is so annoying to deal with. I actually keep mine most of the time all coiled up and in one of those tie wraps so that it doesn't go everywhere, because it holds its shape much too well. It's heavy in itself, and it's really long. Being long is not a problem, but this material, this fabric they're using here is just not the best. It has too much memory, and these connectors are fine, but it feels like you're gonna break them whenever you take them out of the headphone, as you push them in with a lot of force and you pull them out with a lot of force. Also, if I remember correctly, these are a proprietary connector, which makes aftermarket cables just that much more expensive for this headphone. So just some thoughts about the cable there. Another thing you should know about this headphone is it scratches very easily. You can easily damage the finish. So if you do buy this thing, keep it on a stand, keep it away from sharp objects, because the aluminum will scratch here and it'll get really dinged up over time. So now moving on more to the sound section of this, these are actually easier to drive than the HD600, which is something that surprised me as well. I think they're the same impedance. Yeah, they are the same impedance, 300 ohms, but they actually run louder than the 600 does at the same volume, which I was quite surprised by, but that's a thing. Also, so now talking about the sound here, okay, the sound of the HD800 is very, very well known at this point. And I took a guess as to saying this may be the most accurately diffuse field equalized headphone ever, and it seems like that was correct. They are a bit thick though in the upper bass if you're going off the DF target strictly. Also, there's quite a big dip, not huge, but I mean like, if you say 3 to 5 dB is huge, but it seems like you're around 3 or 5 dB too dark at 1.5K or somewhere around there. There isn't enough smooth build up to the 3K peak that should be there. And the treble does still have some forwardness at 6K that it shouldn't have. But other than that, it's pretty close to the target. And Sennheiser's graph, they give you a graph with every one of these headphones. You can basically ask them for what the graph is for your serial number, and they'll send it to you. And that graph is very smooth and very, very vague, basically. So it shows that they're following the DF target, though, because that's the sound field they set up to calibrate the headphone to make sure that the drivers are not too mismatched from headphone to headphone. So that's what it sounds like. I find it far too bright, of course, as you all probably know by now. I still do find it too bright, but that's how it sounds. It sounds like a diffuse field headphone. So equalization this may be the most equalizable headphone I've ever encountered, because the drivers are so crisp and fast and detailed, and their transient response is so quick that equalization is quite easy. Now, equalizing this headphone still may induce other artifacts. As some people know, there's a whole thing behind linear phase EQs and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into that details of that stuff. I'll let some people comment who are smarter than me about EQ in here. You can't make a headphone perfect with EQ. It usually introduces some kind of artifact. But that said, this headphone does not really tend to hold its signature very much when equalizing, so you can make it sound kind of however you want, which is really awesome, because that's what I've done. I've basically taken this thing, made it sound like a 600 or 650 with more bass and less of that mid-range shout that those have, and the results are absolutely spectacular. It is amazing. I still think that the soundstage is the best I've ever heard, period. There is nothing out there that I know of that has a wider soundstage. Sometimes it can sound slightly unnatural, and it will definitely surprise you if you've never heard this headphone before. It is unlike anything I've ever heard on a headphone before. However, even with that said, with the EQ, there's a lot of positioning on the head variants here that I also don't see get talked about that much in other reviews. When you move this thing around, it changes sound quite a bit. You put on your head and then you move it forward, back, up, down, and you hear peaks kind of move around when you do that. My EQ is designed mostly so that the headphone is put on your head and then pushed forward about as much as you can go with these sliders at max. And that's kind of how I have it EQ'd. Now I'm EQing to that target, and that's the thing. I have to mention that here, because the sound target changes depending on where you wear the headphone, and it changes a lot in this one because, man, these cups are massive. This is a really big headphone, of course. I'm not 100% sure why Sennheiser decided to make the ear cups so fast, but that's something to note. They do change up quite a bit. So if you're equalizing this thing, chances are you're going to want to play with my EQ settings for where the peak locations are at, because they shift around quite a bit. Take a look at Tile's measurement of the original HD800, and you'll see this on the raw measurements. They vary so much from measurement to measurement, just because he's changing the position on the head, and it changes the sound quite a bit in the mids and highs. As far as amping this thing, yeah, it's very transparent to amps. It will react quite significantly depending on what amp you are plugging it into. And this is very weird for me to say, because it's almost a meme now that I believe that amps sound all the same, but they don't. They don't. And one of the easiest ways for me to destroy the sound potential of this headphone is to plug into something like motherboard audio or a receiver with a high output impedance. The bass just gets slow, bloaty, and it's obvious. And even I can hear a difference on that, then you can too, probably. So don't plug this thing into your motherboard. Don't plug it into some really cheap sound card. Get yourself at least a decent setup with a Magni 2, Modi 2, or your favorite amp combo, NFB11, that kind of thing. Whatever you think is decent, but don't buy something ultra cheap and then expect the full sound experience and detail from this headphone, because it's really not quite going to get you there. I think it sounds fine out of my stack, perhaps slightly brighter than other setups, but it's up to you on amping. But just know that you don't want to plug this into cheap stuff, because I mean, that should be taken for, I mean, obvious, but I have to note that here. If you want to hear about the HD800 on different amps, I highly recommend you check out Aornic's channel. I'm going to link him in the description. He does a lot of really, really detailed reviews and has much better video quality than I do as well. The thing that's great about this headphone now, in terms of pricing, is that you can find these things used for like $650, which sounds like a lot of money, but holy moly, the headphone you're getting for that price is like spectacular. I would say if you can find one of these under even $700 and it's in decent condition, holy crap, you would be missing out on a lot not to buy this thing. Like I said though, I don't like it without EQ. Some people might, and it does sound quite good with acoustic without EQ. But you know, if you have an EQ handy, or you want to try out my setup with this thing and EQ, and you know that it's so resolving for that price that it's crazy. So I'm very happy. These are actually quite obtainable now compared to how they used to be when they came out, when they were $1,500. So that leads me to along those lines also say this headphone is really a journey, and it could lead down a very, very dark path for your wallet very, very quickly. That should not be too surprising, but this headphone's been modded a lot. There's the Super DuPont Resonator mod, there's the ANAX mod, there's some Super Baff mods, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do to this headphone. And then there's all the amp pairings, the DAC pairings, then you can EQ on top of that. So there's so much that this can be, you know, adjusted to your liking, that you may end up down an expensive path after already purchasing this headphone, which is up there in price. And you may never completely fix it. I want to mention that, even if you like the sound stock, and I hope that some of you do, because that just makes life so much easier. But if you don't, you may never quite get there to your exact sound that you're looking for. I've gotten pretty close to the point where I really enjoy these, but this is why headphones like the LCD2 exist. If you like a darker sound, but you don't want to mess with EQs, and you don't want to mess with a ton of amp pairings, and you just want something that works and it's pleasing to listen to rather than very analytical like this headphone is. That's why that kind of stuff exists. But so the HD800 is kind of a beginning of a journey. That's how I think of it. And lastly, talking about the Super DuPont Resonator mod, I actually bought some SDR mod materials straight from Saroja. I'm going to link that in the description as well, so if you want to try out the SDR mod, you can yourself. But it just did not have the intended effect to me. I saw so many graphs that are like, oh, it reduces 6K peak by like 3 dB, 4 dB. I just did not hear that. It does do something, and I think a lot of it has to do with time domain, as this headphone is known to have a little bit of ringing at 6K. So I think it helps that. But there was also a problem where it sounded like there was a minor channel imbalance after putting in the dampening materials, the resonators, into this thing. And I just didn't feel like I wanted that, so I got rid of them. So it didn't work for me, but you know, you may have a better experience. So that's what I want to talk about with SDR. So there you go. That's the HD800, an updated review. You know, you guys have been asking for this. Hopefully, this answers most of your questions. And if I haven't, you know where the comment section is, and I'll try to answer as many of them as I can. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you in the next review soon.